In this video, we break down the long history of UFO whistleblowers and the Lockheed transfer CIA allegedly stopped.
I know there's been multiple contact events. Like
Coordinated
straight up
events?
contact events. One of them is revealed in the film, actually, but there are more. Several of the people in my film talk about an event that happened at Holloman Air Force Base where two non-human crafts approached the base, one landed, beings walked out and interacted with Air Force officials and CIA officials. And a couple people go on the record talking about that in the film. But there have been other events, I've been told.
How are those beings described?
They were described as tall, slender, humanoid.
What Farah is pointing to here is the Holloman Air Force Base contact story, one of the most talked about direct encounter cases in modern UFO history. The account says that in 1964, multiple craft approached the base, one landed, and U.S. personnel were present for a face-to-face interaction. That story later became a major part of Robert Emenegger's 1970s UFO documentary work, which helped turn Holloman into one of the central legends of the disclosure world. It is also why so many believers connect Holloman to close encounters, because the overlap is hard to ignore. A secure military landing zone, officials waiting on the ground, and a peaceful meeting with humanoid beings.
Another thing that I heard that gave me chills was that someone involved with a recovery interacted with a non-human being that was dying and heard thoughts in his head that said, "You humans don't know your full potential." And that was said to me by a very senior, older guy from the intelligence community. And I thought that was pretty incredible.
This is common. There is no shortage of former government officials who have come forward on this. On the military side, David Fravor, Ryan Graves, Charles Halt, and Tim Gallaudet. On the intelligence and defense side, David Grush, Luis Elizondo, and former CIA Director John Brennan, just to name a few.
Also, just the extent to which the legacy program is real. This isn't like 50 guys, sitting in a quiet, dark room. You're talking about a massive program with thousands of people going to work every day and dealing with this. The fact that that is a thing, and we had a similar dynamic for the Manhattan Project. There were always people working on it, and they kept it secret, right? And their neighbors and friends didn't know. But this is that on steroids. So, after the Manhattan Project, which was had a budget in the billions, this situation arose, and it had to be even more secret than the Manhattan Project, because the Manhattan Project, we found out in hindsight, leaked, right? There were moles.
Right.
So we needed to make this even more secret and give it more money and more resources and more, counter intel.
And that part actually has historical precedent. The Manhattan Project employed well over 100,000 people across multiple sites, but most of them had no idea what the full project was. That is how real secret programs work. You do not tell everyone everything. You split the work apart, lock it behind need-to-know access, bury it under code names, contractors, military security, and counterintelligence, and make sure almost nobody can see the whole picture. So when people hear thousands of people and assume it could not stay hidden, history says the opposite. The bigger the project, the more it depends on compartmentalization.
And more threats.
Which is counterintel, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, threats if you reveal those secrets. But it's like the more this stuff gets discussed, the more I go back to what Lazar said. Because what Lazar is describing from the 1980s is exactly what these people are saying now. They've had these things. They've been trying to figure them out. They've been working on them. At least in the 1980s, they hadn't totally cracked it yet. But they did know how to operate them and that they would do these tests. But everything was so compartmentalized, he said. He wasn't allowed to talk to the metallurgist.
Bob Lazar was the man who went public in 1989, claiming he had worked at a secret site near Area 51 called S4, where the government was trying to reverse engineer recovered craft. His story was not just that the objects existed. It was that the program was deeply compartmentalized, that nobody was allowed to see the full picture, and that teams were separated so tightly they could only work on one piece at a time. So when people today describe legacy programs, hidden technology, and extreme secrecy, believers hear an echo of Lazar immediately.
Where you could have one team of defense contractors who are working on one thing. They're not even told it's from an alien spacecraft. They're just told, here's the thing. It might be Russia. It might be China. Tell us how it works.
Right.
They're just kept in a little bubble. And one of the issues now is that everything's become so overclassified and so siloed that it's actually hurting progress. And that's a lot of the scientists in my film are voicing that. And one of the other things I learned recently that isn't in the film, Jay Stratton, who ran the UAP Task Force, he told me that during that time, he had started a talk with one of the senior scientists at Lockheed who was frustrated by how overclassified everything was.
The federal government runs on layers: approvals, clearances, chain of command. Even routine decisions can require multiple sign-offs. When it comes to classified information, that process becomes even tighter. Access is restricted, documents are compartmentalized, and no single person sees the full picture.
It even made it hard for the defense contractors to get the right manpower and brains on it, because not everyone can be cleared to do the work, right? There's all these like red tape hurdles to progress, right? And so they had made a plan to move one of the crafts that had been recovered that was in Lockheed's possession into the possession of the UAP Task Force. And then the task force was going to be able to put more brain power towards it. And then the head of science and technology at the CIA shut it down in the middle of the transfer. They had actually secured a hangar on a military base and prepped it to be a classified hangar that would hold this craft, and they were stopped.
And this is the part that really grabs you. Dan Farah says Jay Stratton told him a craft in Lockheed's possession was actually supposed to be moved, that a secure hangar on a military base had already been prepared, and that the transfer was stopped by the head of science and technology at CIA. That matters because it lines up with a broader public trail. George Knapp later testified to Congress that Lockheed had been safeguarding unusual material in California and that a transfer deal had been worked out but never completed. If these accounts are accurate, then the most revealing part is not just the material. It is that as soon as it was about to reach more qualified hands, someone stepped in and stopped it.
The overclassification is definitely a hurdle for this. And our competitors don't necessarily have that. Like there's no free will in China. She can just be like, hey, you're the smartest guy graduating your class. You're going to go work for the nation on this,
Right, period.
And here, the problem is no one knows it's real. One of the things I hope the film changes is it makes the scientific community know that this is a valid area of inquiry. This is real. It's a real situation. And there's a ton of problems for the next generation of engineers and scientists to solve,
If this is real, then some of the most important problems in science are being worked on in secret, while everyone else is left in the dark. That's why he makes the comparison to China. In a country like that, they can tell you what to do, so something being classified doesn't matter as much. But here, if nobody knows about a thing, it's much harder to get top minds into the field.
And so hopefully it inspires them and helps us make progress, because there's a lot of progress that could be made here.
Well, it certainly seems like it, but it's like one of the things that you guys propose in the film that I think may be the only way forward is some sort of a mass amnesty to all these people that did lie to Congress and probably misappropriated funds and maybe stole a little bit here and there.
There could be plenty of reasons to keep something hidden that have nothing to do with national security. Just look at the Epstein files. People in government protect their own interests, their own institutions, and sometimes themselves.
Like if that doesn't happen, no one is going to push to make this public. No one's going to push for like actual full disclosure because it leaves them too exposed. And if they do have the kind of power that they must have to be running an organization of thousands of people working on something with unbelievable amounts of money being transferred to these programs, the only way we're ever going to really do that is to completely reveal that this is actually really happening. This is real crafts from somewhere or something. We have them. We'll tell you where we have them. And I think right now, people wouldn't even freak out.
Plenty of people would likely freak out. But with everything going on with the U.S. government in the past decade, Joe might have a point.
To say this is what I know to be true, to me, that's the greatest evidence that exists. But I do think, to your point, amnesty is something that's gonna have to be figured out, because while it's hard for anyone to accept letting people off the hook for wrongdoings, right? It does seem like it's in the best interest of the bigger picture.
100%.
Because these people just aren't good. They have no incentive to come forward with what they've learned. And so to quote Rubio in the film, he says, look, this is not a endeavor to go and punish anyone, but we need to know what they learned.
Right.
And I think he's totally dead on. And,
is he in favor of some sort of an amnesty program as well?
Yeah, he says on camera in the film, he's like, I'm not trying to punish anyone. I need to know what they learned because taxpayers paid for this, and it's in our interest to know what's going on.
And just pause on how extraordinary that is. We are talking about the current U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, not some fringe figure, saying that people with very high clearances and very high positions in government have come forward on this. And in the documentary, he is quoted saying, "Even presidents have been kept on a need-to-know basis." At that point, this stops sounding like a sideshow and starts sounding like a hidden structure inside the government itself.
But the other thing that's needed is real whistleblower protection,
Right.
not the whistleblower protection that's been passed so far, like much stronger legal protections, so that people like the folks I talked to, the special forces guys I talked to, were going to come forward and then decided they thought to be forfeiting their lives. You've got to change that set of circumstances. You got to make those people feel like that's not going to happen to them.
Right.
Whistleblowers in national security don't just risk embarrassment. They risk prison, exile, or losing everything. Edward Snowden fled the country. Chelsea Manning was sentenced to decades in prison. Thomas Drake tried to go through official channels and still ended up charged with his career destroyed.
And what I think ultimately is going to happen, and I wouldn't be surprised, man, if it happens soon after the film comes out, I think a sitting president has to step to the microphone and say, definitively, humanity's not alone in the universe. We have recovered technology of non-human origin. So have other nations. There is a high-stakes secret Cold War race to reverse engineer this technology. We need to win this race, and the U.S. intends to lead in this new chapter. I think that needs to happen, like a level set of basic facts, and I really do think it will happen.
So what do you think happens next? Does this growing paper trail lead to a much bigger disclosure story? Or are we still only seeing the edges of it? And if the CIA really stepped in to stop that transfer, what do you think the reason was? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more deep breakdowns on stories like this, like the video and subscribe to Classified Context.